Thank you very much for joining me for today's webinar, Staying Positive in the Current Situation. I'm Beth Wood and I'm one of the directors of Mind Fitness. Mind Fitness works in organisations throughout the UK, and then we also work with individuals in public sessions and public events. There are two other directors of Mind Fitness. This is them. So there's Brian coming up there on the left and Andy on the right. So Andy and I head up the mental health, mind fitness side of the business operation, and Brian heads up the business skill set, but that's still taught so through the lens of mind fitness. We also have a brilliant marketing team, and this is they. This is Irem, Erin and Jess. And then we have practitioners who work with us in schools. We have a 3-year project funded by Children in Need and also help us to deliver in the organisations. So we have our book, that's Unlock You, and that was published by Pearson in 2019. And this year it's been nominated for British Business Book of the Year. I think that's the right way around, which is very exciting. And even more exciting, we have Tembo. So Tembo is our free app, and our team have built that and got it out during the COVID crisis. And it's absolutely free, and it's got so many tools and exercises on it. And we'll come back sort of at the end of the webinar and look at how you can download it. We really hope that everyone does. So in terms of this webinar today, it's about 50 minutes. And then I'm going to stay on for a Q&A at the end of that. So if you have any questions or any comments, please could I ask you to use the chat function rather than the Q&A function, just so that I only look at one place when I get to the end and I can stay on and do that. And at the end, one of the slides will have my email address. So if there's any question that you wouldn't want me to answer online, but you'd like to send in an email, you're also very welcome to do that. So we had quite a few people who registered for this webinar who asked if it was possible to get a recording for the last webinar, which was Coping in a Crisis. And that went out about a month ago on the 1st of May. So what we're going to do, and actually we've also got a few people today who have registered but are key workers and find themselves sort of working in care homes or back to school. So we're going to actually send out links to everyone who registered for this session for both of the recorded webinars, the Coping in a Crisis and this webinar, Staying Positive in the Current Situation. So before I start, it would be brilliant if you could grab a pen and a paper if you don't have one already to hand. There's a few things that I'm going to ask you to write down, and there's just one sort of exercise that we'll do as we go through along the way. And like the last webinar, there's 3 main sort of techniques that I'm going to give, and then right at the very end we'll do 3 top tips, and then we'll go into the Q&A. So just to set up a little bit of context, it's not surprising that so many people are finding it hard to get positive and especially to stay positive in the current situation. You know, we are essentially creatures of habit, and it's very rare that so much change has been thrown at us so quickly. You know, actually, we're just about to go through another period of change as we come out of this lockdown. So this is a really good time to do this webinar, really excellent time. And what we'll be looking at today are techniques based in rational thinking. It isn't about pretending that what's happening all around us isn't there, and it isn't about pretending that things are better than they are. Instead, I'm going to be giving you techniques based on rational thinking that will allow you to look more positively and respond in a more positive way to your current situation. And then I'm also, very importantly, going to give techniques to build a more robust and positive self-image, which will help you to deal more effectively with the challenges that you might be facing at the moment. So it's really about how we use those to establish and maintain a positive mindset. You know, the most important thing after a setback is what happens next. So we've had the setback, we can now decide what happens next. So we're going to think for a moment about what positivity or positive thinking is. So I'd like you just to write down those words, positive thinking. And then after this session finishes, it would be brilliant if you could just spend a little bit of time thinking about what that means to you. How would you define it or describe it? So in Mind Fitness, positive thinking is rational thinking seen through the lens of optimism. So what does that mean? It's actually about getting rid of the negative bias that our brain is prone to. So in case you didn't do the last webinar, just very briefly, our brain works on a system of threats and rewards, and it will always head towards the threats because that's survival instinct, unless we pull it across to the rewards. So it's about getting rid of that, the bias that we all have. That's just the way our brain works. So it isn't about wishing or pretending that the glass was half full. It's about seeing that it is. That's absolutely key. And we use neuroscience. So we can understand how the brain works and optimize its function, in this case, in terms of creating and maintaining a positive mindset. In a way, the whole of the Mind Fitness program is about establishing a positive mindset. And it's just remembering that the way we look at the world is a choice. You know, we can choose to have a good day, a good week, a good month. You know, and this very short life, why wouldn't we? There's a really brilliant quote that I love from Abraham Lincoln. And it says, "We can complain when rose bushes have thorns, or rejoice because thorns have roses." You know, so let's do the second as much as we possibly can. So that means feeling happier. Essentially, it's about feeling more positive, feeling happier. So again, I'd like you just to write down that word, happiness. And after the session, think about what does that mean to you? How would you describe it? How would you define it? What does it feel like when you feel happy? And the definition that we go with is a state in which we feel pleasant thoughts a good deal of the time. And I'm actually going to come back to the idea of happiness at the end of the webinar, because the 3 top tips at the end are all about ways in which we can feel happier. In terms of the science, we are essentially an organic computer. We have about 100,000 chemical reactions per second. And the emotions that we feel are induced by a chemical, or in most cases, a compound of chemicals moving through our body. So in the last webinar about anxiety, we thought about the chemical cortisol. That's our stress hormone. And cortisol levels rise when we're feeling anxious or stressed. So that's one of the chemicals that we can shoot through our body. There's several chemicals that are associated with pleasure or happiness that I'll be referencing, at least 2 of them, quite a bit through the session. So the first one is dopamine, and that tends to give you sort of spiky highs. It's the chemical that gets released when we either eat a bar of chocolate, but actually it comes in the anticipating of it, or when we think about anything that we're really strongly keen on doing. The second one, which is probably the most relevant to this session, is called serotonin, and that tends to give you that kind of level contentment, happiness. And then one that I will just mention is oxytocin, and that's sometimes thought of as the cuddle hormone, because it's the hormone that gets released if you hug a partner, stroke a dog. It's when mummy says, you know, mummy, you kiss it better, then you get an oxytocin release. So it's actually mummy does kiss it better, which is pretty wonderful. So by releasing a different set of chemicals, by having a different set of thoughts, a different way of thinking, we get to feel a whole lot happier. So I'd like you just to think about, what does happiness look like from the outside? Maybe you know somebody that exudes happiness. Just focus in on them for a moment and just think about, what does happiness look like? And then maybe you can think in terms of that person, what do you think causes it? So I would say not the spiky high of dopamine, but certainly the serotonin high, contentment, is very closely linked to the concept of acceptance. In the last webinar, we talked about the fact that we can only change what we can control. We have to identify what is and what isn't in our control. And if something isn't in our control, we have to accept it. We might not approve of it, but we have to accept it. And I would say that if we can adopt that practice of accepting what isn't in our control, we go a long way to progressing towards that state of contentment, serotonin, happiness. So why do we need positivity then? Why is it important? Science tells us that a positive outlook is really closely linked to perseverance and endurance. It gives us the power to bust through the obstacles that are in our way. It's also responsible for us noticing the opportunities that are scattered along the way. So, you know, certainly I know that pre the mind fitness process, I never used to see the opportunities that I see all the time now. And I'm sure they were there. I just literally didn't notice them. And that's quite sad. Positivity has also been linked to the healing process. So even cancer patients, if they have a positive outlook on their prognosis and their life, are likely to recover better. If it's something you're interested in, have a look at the research of Jon Kabat-Zinn. It's absolutely fascinating. And then it's also the acceptance that if you don't have a positive outlook, even if you're doing pretty wonderful things, it's likely to feel like an uphill battle or a chore. You know, I know that in the past, I've got to the end of pretty brilliant projects, you know, and all you think of is, thank God for that, now I can sleep. It's just the kind of getting through it rather than the joy of doing it. And again, that's an absolute shame. And because all of the mind fitness process is not just about internal change, it's about how we reflect that outwards, how it changes our connections and the way we work within society. It's also worth remembering that optimism is contagious. Let's have a moment to think about the person that you thought exuded happiness. How far does that spread around them? And then it's also remembering that the opposite is also true. You know, and I don't at all mean by that if we have mental health issues that we shouldn't talk about it. We absolutely should. That conversation is essential. But it does mean that on a more trivial level, we probably should think a lot more carefully before we condemn and we complain. So from there, I'm going to go into the first of the 3 techniques that we're going to look at today, and that is using rational thinking. Positivity and rational thinking. So in the last webinar, what we did is we challenged and hopefully changed some negative thinking. What we're going to do today is take that one step further and now replace that with the positive. We believe that positivity is absolutely linked to rational thinking. If you build in positivity and it's only superficial, if it's not grounded or solid, grounded in reality, then what will happen is the first time that a crisis or difficulty comes along, it just gets swept out the window. Whereas if you're looking to use the neuroscience and to rewire in the way that we're doing, when the trouble hits, you'll deal with it really well. And actually that will make you feel more positive, which will help you cope better in the next crisis and so on. Being able to cope in a crisis is a really important, essential, in fact, part of the process. So that's key. And that doesn't mean that anyone will be getting through this without some negative thinking. You know, it's very unlikely that no negative thoughts are going to be coming into our minds. But it's just remembering that just because we think something doesn't mean that we have to believe it, let alone act upon it. So just keep that in your mind. Mind fitness is about the negative and the positive. So an awful lot of self-help change programs are either about challenging the negative or about positive psychology and just instilling a more positive mindset. In Mind Fitness, it's absolutely about both. Yes, you have to challenge and change the negative, but just as important, we all have thousands and thousands of positive beliefs that we could be using to help us through pretty nearly any situation. And so identifying those and bringing them to the front and center of our lives is absolutely a key part of the process. And we'll be thinking about how that works today. So in terms of rational thinking, we're looking at how we reframe, and I'm just going to give a very quick paragraph sort of recap on that for the people that weren't here last week. So the premise that we use in all of our reframing is this: our stress or disturbance does not come from the situation or event, but from our response to that situation. You know, and that's what gives us the choice and the control. We can choose how we respond to any situation. And we're going to look today about how we can respond positively to situations wherever possible. So what we did last time is we looked at how we could lessen the demands, the heavy demands that we place upon ourselves, and swap in some of those demands for preferences. So the language around demands is must, have to, should, those kind of words. And the format of a preference is I would prefer that ... but ... So to give you a reminder, it might be I must be better at homeschooling my children, something that I've heard an awful lot of people say during lockdown. And if we were going to change that for a preference, it might be I would prefer that I had more teaching experience in terms of homeschooling my children better, but I accept that all I have are the resources that are being sent home from school. But that's how far we got on the last webinar. On this one, what we're going to do is we're going to try and make sure now that the second half of that preference is as positive that you can make it while still keeping it grounded in reality. So using that example, it might be, I would prefer that I had more experience in homeschooling my children, but I know that I have transferable skills, and thanks to the internet, I can use the expertise of Bite Size and Joe Wicks. And that's still rational, because you will have transferable skills. And so far, at least, the internet is holding up okay. And as much as you can when you're doing that, try and be specific, because then your brain is much more convinced that what you're telling it is the truth. So in terms of those transferable skills, know what they are. So you might know that actually I'm good at researching, so I can fill in any gaps, or I'm good at communicating, so I can explain it to my child. Whatever it is, try and keep it as specific as you can, and use those positive thoughts, bring them to the front and to the center. That's absolutely key. And we're going to look at a couple of ways of doing that in a minute. Just thinking first about also removing as much of the negative bias as we possibly can. So as we said, threats and rewards, brain will head to the threats. We need to bring it across to the rewards. So when we're trying to diminish that, it's firstly about awareness. We looked in the last webinar about reducing the amount that we awfulize or catastrophize. So we all have a tendency to think that things are more awful than they are. And we looked at the ways that we could bring that number down. So if we said on a scale of 1 to 10, how awful is it really? In most situations, if we look rationally at it, it's probably a lower number than we first thought that it was. Why cognitive bias exists is because our brain only has the huge number of experiences to draw upon whenever we ask it to do absolutely anything. And so it selects up the information that it thinks that we require. But for two reasons, it heads towards the negative. The first one is, as we said, threats and rewards. The second one is because it will give more weight to any experience which has an intense emotion attached to it. And sadly, in the Western world, we're much more likely to have intense negative emotions than we are intense positive emotions. So for that reason, it's likely to head towards the negative unless we think of ways of bringing it to the positive. One of the thinking errors or cognitive biases, sometimes they're called thinking errors, cognitive biases, or cognitive distortions, but always remember, it's not an error in your thinking, it's just the way the brain works. One of the common ones that I've heard a lot in lockdown has been low frustration tolerance. And that's not surprising because we've had a lot of families, for example, who are living together in close confinement, very small spaces, sharing computers, all sorts of pressures and problems. So low frustration tolerance, definitely one to look out for. Having said that, I do think that there are ways in lockdown that people have been exhibiting higher frustration tolerance than might usually be the case. And one of the things I'm thinking of is queuing. So business partner Andy, who you saw at the beginning, has a real aversion to queuing, low frustration tolerance, definitely. And I know a lot of people are the same. And yet, most people in the current situation have stood outside Tesco's with their trolley for an hour, with very little complaining going on. So always try and be aware of your negative thinking. Pessimists, for example, practice selective thinking, where they're magnifying the negative and discounting the positive. And so, somebody who does that in an extreme way, that will be certainly life inhibiting, but probably most of us do it some of the time. So it's something that's really worth being aware of. And if you're interested in knowing more about reframing and working down those cognitive biases, there's information on our website in the Unlock You resources section, and there's lots and lots of exercises on Tembo, the app, about to do with reframing if you go into the exercise hub on Tembo. So that's a really important one. What it means that we need to do is be aware and then look more rationally. And in doing that, we need to look for the positive. And when I say look for the positive, I really do mean actively look for the positive. So if I'm coaching someone and they tell me something that they're worried about, and I say, what are the positives in that? They'll almost inevitably say none. But if instead of saying that, I say, okay, close your eyes, and I'm going to give you 3 minutes to list all the positives in the situation. After 3 minutes, they will have a list. It's just about spending the time looking, and in difficult situations that quite a lot of people are going through at the moment, that means we have to look. We have to take the time. Things will be hidden. The positives might be hidden more than they usually would. But it is really important to do. And sometimes in tragic or traumatic situations, that can almost seem irreverent to look for the positive, but it is when you'll need it the most. So it's absolutely key still to do it. So that's the end of the first technique for today, which is about rational thinking. And our second technique that we're going to look at is goals, beliefs, and meaning, bringing together the goals, the beliefs, and the meaning that we have. So I'm a mindfulness practitioner, so that's very much about living in the present. But I still think that having goals is incredibly important. Our health, our mental health, and our sense of well-being doesn't depend so much on where we are, but on the direction in which we're headed. And that's an absolutely key thing to keep in your mind. And it's one of the main reasons why having goals is so important. You know, there's so many people that I know that have goals, clearly set goals in terms of their professional life, but not in terms of their personal life. You know, if you think about it, we spend such a long time planning a holiday because we don't want to miss 2 weeks or waste 2 weeks of our lifetime. And yet we'll waste years because we haven't chosen goals, or we've chosen goals that aren't actually going to bring us happiness, or perhaps we've chosen goals that are unattainable, which is just about one of the most stressful things that you can do. In terms of positivity, what we're looking at today is bringing together goals, beliefs, and meaning, and bringing them into as tight a relationship with each other as possible. I would say it's probably the key component to stopping getting in your own way, stopping the self-sabotage. It's also incredibly important in terms of a positive self-image, which we're going to look at as the third technique today. Because when we have goals, beliefs, and meaning coming together, we feel authentic, you know, and conversely, when we don't feel true to ourselves, you know, that's when we really feel bad about ourselves. So bringing together goals, beliefs, and meaning is absolutely key. And it sounds like it would be obvious and simple, but actually there's been an awful lot of people that we've worked with who you will ask them what gives meaning to their life, and they either aren't invested in it very much or haven't thought about it, or even have a clear sense of what it is, but no real relationship with that. So to give you an example, we worked with one woman and we said, you know, what gives meaning to your life? And she said, animal rights. And she said it with real passion. And we said, brilliant. So what do you do in your life that's to do with animal rights? And she said, nothing. And that's really not uncommon. So making sure that you use whatever gives meaning, drive, passion into your life as much as you possibly can is really important. We're going to do just a little bit of an exercise now, where I'm going to ask you to think about and then write down what gives meaning to your life. It can be big, it can be small, whatever would make you want to get up in the morning or give you that feeling, the buzz or the lovely burst of serotonin, whatever that means to you. Just think about it. Think about it as clearly and specifically as you can. And then write it down so that you've got it to come back to at the end of this session. And then once you've got that meaning clearly stated, what comes next is trying to rework that into a main goal. In other words, into something that you personally could achieve. And sometimes that means thinking about what your skill set is or what you're most interested in, especially if you've chosen something really overarching like world peace. You know, so to give you an example, my meaning comes from inclusivity and spreading the message about better mental health. So what I do is I run two companies. I run Mind Fitness, and then I also run Prospero Theatre, which is a theatre company for inclusive theatre company for adults and young people with disabilities and mental health issues. But what I could do and still fulfill my meaning might be work as a fundraiser for a mental health charity, or perhaps as a teacher in a special school. So what you're doing when you think about your main goal is you're shaping that meaning into something that you personally could achieve. There's an absolutely brilliant book by Napoleon Hill, which I totally recommend, called Think and Grow Rich. And in that, he uses the analogy of the main goal as a boat. And he always comes back and says, yes, but will it make the boat go faster? And that's a really useful thing to ask yourself. So Andy and I, for example, we do, you know, Mind Fitness covers lots of different areas, the schools, the performers, the corporates, the charities, the individuals, you know, but we always come back when we're offered a new project and say, okay, it's really exciting, but will it make the boat go faster? It's a really brilliant thing to have into your mind. And then I would say to try and make sure that any smaller goals that you have are linked in some way to your main goal and your message, if you possibly can, because then you'll be motivated to achieve them. So to give a couple of examples, in lockdown, two of my small goals were to eat better, more nutritionally, and to declutter, to actually go through files, both soft and hard. You know, and I know that I will have myself better mental health if I do that. And then taking that a step further, if I have better mental health, I'm probably going to be training people better. We're doing an awful lot of online training at the moment. So hopefully that means that other people will have better mental health as well. So if you can try and just link them to your meaning, that's absolutely brilliant. So we're going to think about the belief side of it next. As we said at the beginning, we all have thousands of beliefs, some of them negative, some of them positive. Probably not aware of most of them. So you will have negative, unhelpful beliefs that will be getting in your way and stopping you achieving those goals. And you'll have positive ones that you could be using to help you achieve those goals. So just thinking about the negative first, sometimes it's obvious and sometimes it's not so much. So as an example, we worked with one person who wanted to run a marathon, but they had a belief that family members look after elderly relatives better than outsiders. And that person was looking after an elderly parent. And that meant, because of that belief, that they weren't finding the time to go out and train or really give enough passion and commitment to the goal of running the marathon. So it meant revisiting that belief and saying, okay, changing it to a preference. I would prefer that every day my mother was cared for by a family member, but I accept that 3 days a week someone else is going to come in just for a couple of hours. And so that meant that she was able to go on and achieve her goal and run the marathon. So often we'll be having negative self-beliefs that are tripping us up and stopping us achieving those goals. Sometimes we find they even run directly counter to the meaning that we've set for ourselves. So really have a think about any negative beliefs that you need to challenge and change that will be stopping you achieving those goals. In terms of the positive beliefs that you have, some of them will be directly linked to achieving the goal and you can employ them straight away. I would definitely say though, make a note now to say list of positive beliefs. And then at the end of the session, just take as much time as you can to list all the positive beliefs that you have about yourself, the situation, the world around you, because as new goals come online, you can then go back and look at those positive beliefs and see if you can draw some of them in to help you achieve them. So to give an example, for quite a long time, I've had a belief that I'm okay, pretty good at writing, because I've written lots of plays. And for years and years, I wrote the drama activities for the Longman Shakespeare series. So when we wanted to scale up Mind Fitness to be able to reach more people than we possibly could doing face-to-face meetings, it was an obvious choice to write the book. So once you've written those positive beliefs down, you know, they're there for you to go back to. They'll make you feel stronger every time you look at them, but also you can draw them in as new goals come along, which is really important. And that is linked to motivation. So we all have the ability to motivate ourselves to achieve our goals far more than most of us actually do. And the way that we can do that is employing focus. if we focus on the color blue, when I was doing the mindfulness with you last time, I mentioned that if you looked out for the color blue all day, not only would you see more of it than you thought existed, but it will become bluer and bluer. Because as we focus something, our sensory perception and the emotional response associated with it will increase, will intensify, either way, negative or positive, but in this case, positive. If we ask you who you're feeling grateful for, and then you have like a minute to really think about that person, to focus in on that person, your gratitude will become more sincere, more profound, and more intense. That's just the way our brain works. So if we focus in on our meaning and our passion and our goals, we will feel a hell of a lot more motivated to achieve them. You know, there are some great motivational courses around, you know, and I like doing them just as much as everyone else. But essentially, we can do that for ourselves. Very important to remember. So that's the end of the second technique, which is goals, beliefs, and meaning. So we've looked now at rational thinking, goals, beliefs, and meaning. And then we're going to look next at self-image. Again, very, very important. So we are literally programmed, hypnotized, if you like, by our self-image. It will determine the way we respond to the outside world, and it will determine everything we think and feel and the way that we behave. So there probably isn't any boulder that's tripping you up more than a negative self-image. There are a couple of important reasons why negative self-image is so prevalent. I mean, certainly in the projects we do in schools, you know, we find massive commonality across different age ranges and kinds of schools is negative self-image. One of the reasons for that will be the negative self-talk that we say to ourselves. I'd like you just now to draw a circle, and in the circle to write inner critic. And then when this webinar finishes, just draw some spider lines coming out of the circle and write down all the negative self-talk that you know you say to yourself. It can be all the things that we tell ourselves we can't do rather than we can. It can be being really harsh and critical and cruel in a way that we would never be to other people. So after the webinar, write that down. It's good to accept it and be specific. And near the end, I'm going to talk about how we can change that negative self-talk into positive. The second reason why we find that negative self-image is so prevalent is because in this country, we're just not used to being arrogant or boasting. We're taught probably from the age of about 8 or 9. We trade in our sense of accomplishment with a wanting to be liked. And from that time onwards, we don't boast and we try and hide our light under that bushel, and then we forget that it's there. And it really is, you know, we might not want to boast about it, but we have to know about it. It's so important to accept, really properly accept, that low self-opinion isn't a virtue, it's a vice. So let's try and think about getting rid of that negative as much as you can. In terms of sort of the positive self-image, as we've said, bringing together the goals, beliefs, and meaning will really help. And we're going to think now about the way that at Mind Fitness we look at self-image. And it's all about self-value rather than self-esteem. So self-value is the thing that we want to really focus in on. The reason we do that is this, because to estimate is both relative and conditional. Self-esteem is estimating. So that might be relative to other people, the people we're seeing on social media all the time. It might be conditional upon the money you earn, the job title, the car in your drive. What we want to do is move away from that, because if our self-value is relative and conditional, it makes us very vulnerable. It's extremely fragile. It's why you get stockbrokers jumping off buildings when there's a crash. And actually, you know, even in this corona crisis, we've seen some profound effects of of that. You know, I've been working with someone, for example, who worked for an airline, was made redundant a couple of weeks ago, and very much that his image was tied up around his job. So what we try and do is replace self-esteem with unconditional self-acceptance. Back to that word acceptance again. If we want to change anything, accepting where we are is absolutely key. You can't plan a journey from A to B without accepting where A is, who you are and where you are. And so building self-value around that unconditional self-acceptance is absolutely key. So this is the exercise that I actually want us to at least start to do a little bit of as we're going through the webinar. I'd like you to start by drawing on your page the outline of the letter I. It can be a capital I or a small I, and leave lots of room in the middle because you're going to fill it up with some writing in the middle. Make sure there's just a tiny bit of room around the edge if you can, but draw that I so that you can write lots of different things inside it. And what you're going to do first is outside of the I, you're going to write a negative statement that you know you say about yourself, a belief, a negative belief that you have about yourself. It's good if it can be an overarching statement. So for example, I've had people tell me 5, 6 times during lockdown, I am a bad mother. And why that is because they haven't always been as patient as perhaps they could have been while they've been trying to work and homeschool and do a million other things at the same time. So you might, that person might write, I am a bad mother around the edge, or, you know, I am a lazy worker because I watched Netflix when I was supposed to be finishing the project. So whatever is the overarching statement, the negative statement is on the edge, the outside of the I. And what you're going to do now, absolutely key, is you're going to now start to fill up that inside of the I with as many positive statements as you can about yourself. Again, big or small. You know, I love my children to bits. I support my team. I buy organic. I have a rescue dog. I give to charity. I recycle, whatever that might be. So I'm just going to talk while you write down sort of 2 or 3 of those at least before we move on to the third stage of the exercise. And I really would say at the end of this webinar, you know, go back and fill up the I, you know, put as many things in there as you possibly can. And then the third stage of the exercise is to draw a little line from each one of those things that you've written, the little things in the little I, and write what it tells you about yourself. So a characteristic, for example. So if I had written, I give to charity in the little I might do my line to it and it would say, I am a kind and generous person. If I had written, I recycle, my line coming out from it might be, I care about the environment. And when you've done that, when you've got your statements in the little I and all your lines coming out that tell you all the positive qualities that you have because of those little I statements, just stand back from it and spend the time. I strongly urge you to spend the time to read through everything that you've written inside the little I. Now, if you are serious about acquiring and maintaining a positive mindset, then this is the time to ditch the negative statement that is on the outside of that I, because everything that is inside that little I is you. And you know that it's true and based on rational thinking because you've written it. Now, I had one lovely 15-year-old who I did this exercise with, lovely, lovely young girl. And when we did it, she started to cry and she said, I didn't realize I thought so many nice things about myself. It is a really important exercise to do and to spend as much time as you can doing. You know, and then remember that what's inside that little I, will be changing all the time. So go back and revisit it all the time. You know, as we said at the beginning, this is a time of profound change. You know, you don't want to be the old person stepping into a new job, or the old person stepping into a new relationship. Try and make sure that that I, the I that's you, the little I's, all those positive statements stay as fluid and as adaptable as you possibly can. And the last bit of self-image that I want to really think about is positive affirmation. So when you finish this webinar, go back and have a look at all the things you wrote next to where you said inner critic, essentially the negative self-talk. And then what you're going to do is swap that, so turn it on its head, to change them into positive affirmations. So if you had written, I am impatient with my child, your positive affirmation might be, I am able to cope with X when I'm trying to homeschool her, when I'm doing my best, when I am homeschooling her. And in terms of positive affirmation, keep it present tense. So, you know, when I first started doing the Mind Fitness process, Andy tested the whole process on a fear of wasps, and I did it on a fear of heights. So it can be used to things that you are scared of or things you can't do. And it's keeping it present tense. So at that time, I would say, I am good with heights, rather than I will be good with heights. Keep it as a positive construct. So it's not saying I'm not afraid of heights, because then your brain, because of threats and rewards, will latch onto the word afraid. And try and say it out loud to yourself as much as you possibly can. And in terms of the positive affirmations, it can be things from the negative self-talk, the inner critic, as we've said, but it can also be used to reinforce your goals that you've set yourself. I am someone that is able to homeschool the children. I am someone who is able to complete the course that I started on X. So try and use positive affirmation as often as you can, you know, and as well as it becoming, in terms of the neural pathways, your root of least resistance, it will become what your brain expects to happen, will be the positive. You'll also gradually start to bring your brain over in a much more generic way from the threats to the rewards. Positive affirmations are a really important part of that, and change it. So that's the end of our 3 techniques, which were rational thinking, and then goals, beliefs, and meaning, trying to bring them together as much as possible, and then self-image, and especially the idea of using unconditional self-acceptance. So we're moving now into our 3 top tips, and as I said at the beginning, they're all to do with feeling a greater sense of happiness. And the first one that I want to talk about is compassion. So we now know what we've always known, which is that doing something, a compassionate act for somebody else, brings us a sense of contentment and happiness. Because of the science, we can now tell why that happens. So we said earlier that if you eat a bar of chocolate, or actually it's when you anticipate eating the bar of chocolate that you get the hit of dopamine. You will in fact get a hit of dopamine that's 3 times to 5 times as high by an act of compassion, by undertaking an act of compassion, you know, which is pretty amazing, isn't it? You know, and it's lovely to find that so many of the great philosophers and teachers of all religions have been proved right. There's a really lovely quote that I like from Mother Teresa. I don't know if you've seen this one before. It's not how much we give, but how much love we put into the giving. You know, I would say absolutely spot on. And certainly compassion and its very close cousin, empathy, are very important to positive mindset, to feeling happiness, and to resilience. So compassion is the first top tip. The second top tip is mindfulness. So this was one of our sort of major techniques that we looked at in the last webinar. So I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on it today, but I just want to think about the ethos of mindfulness, which is having a mindfulness, a mindful, a compassionate and non-judgmental approach to life. A mindful, compassionate and non-judgmental approach to life. And it's very much about doing one thing at a time to bring that focus really deeply into your life so that you can release the passion that we talked about earlier. You know, do one thing at a time. You know, don't multitask. Multitasking is the enemy of positivity, of good mental health, and actually of genius level work as well. You know, I feel really terrible because pre-Mind Fitness, you know, I think I was the queen of multitasking and probably professed it as a bit of a philosophy. So, you know, I would definitely say to everybody now, focus on one thing at a time, you know, and try and have a stop doing list as well as a to-do list. You know, I feel a hell of a lot better since I adopted that practice. I have a Friday cull, which always makes me feel an awful lot better. Essentially, it's about appreciating life while you're living it. There's so much of our time where we only enjoy things retrospectively. You know, if I think back now to theatre projects that I did pre-Mind Fitness, I go, yeah, I really enjoyed that project, but I didn't, not at the time. You know, so it's, you know, it's trying to make sure that, you know, the feeling of loving your life comes from loving your minutes as you're living them. You know, that's such an important thing to remember. I'm going to do one really quick mindfulness exercise and then specifically look at it for how you could use it for positivity and for feeling happier. So the exercise is called Now. It's a mnemonic, so it's really easy to remember. N stands for notice, O stands for observe, and W stands for wonder. So just cast your eyes around wherever you are now and let your attention focus on one object and notice it. And now closely observe that object for sort of 6 to 8 seconds. Notice the shadow, the shading, the color, texture. And then this is the key one. Bring a sense of wonder to it. That can be wonder as in awe, or it can be wonder as in curiosity. Try and bring a sense of wonder to whatever object you've chosen to notice. So that's a great exercise on that level for bringing down stress, and it's incredibly quick. What we're going to use it for today is for focusing in on what will make you feel positive. So I'm going to get you to do it about this webinar. So I first of all want you to make a couple of observations just to yourself. You can jot them down or just think them. A couple of observations about the webinar as it's coming fairly close to the end. And now, importantly, bring a sense of wonder, as in awe, or wonder, as in curiosity, to whatever you've observed. And that is absolutely the key. You know, we can choose whatever we give our focus to, and that is what will make us feel more positive, more driven, more motivated, and happier. You know, remember, it's only our interest in anything that makes it extraordinary. So reach deep into the things that fascinate you, and life becomes a hell of a lot richer. So moving now into our third and final top tip, which is gratitude. So I know I finished on gratitude last time, but it absolutely is such a key part of the Mind Fitness process and a key part of feeling happier. In terms of the science, Andy and I always talk of it as the ant repellent. So we call automatic negative thoughts the ants. Don't let the ants steal your brain. And we say that gratitude is the ultimate ant repellent. Your brain cannot think a negative thought and feel gratitude at the same time, which is absolutely key. So I always start each day by thinking of 3 things that I'm grateful for, and then I think of 3 things at the end of the day that I'm particularly grateful for that have happened that day. Actually, I think about 3 things that I'm grateful for and 3 things that I've learned. And that goes a long way to making you feel positive. So what gratitude does is essentially is it makes you see the world with new eyes. And that means you're building new neural pathways. You're experiencing life in a different way. And it's always about the cup becoming more full. You probably won't even realize that it is until you next think about it. But because you've looked with those new eyes, and because it's based on the rational thinking that we've gone through during this session, there's so much to be grateful for. The cup definitely becomes more full. Just remembering that today, this day, is priceless, because no amount of money will bring it back. One of the things that I think is most valuable in what people have got out of this lockdown is reevaluating the way they look at time. Time is the most precious thing that we have. Actually, it's the only precious thing that we have. We must even celebrate getting old or getting older, because as we know from this current situation, not everyone has the privilege. So, in conclusion, it's just remembering to acknowledge all the things that make you feel happy and do more of them. Try and think about the things that make you unhappy and do less of them. So as a consumer society, for the last few decades, we've been concentrating on temporary or transitionary happiness, the kind of spiky dopamine high of opening the Amazon package. So what I've tried to do today is focus much more on the serotonin contentment kind of happiness. So that's what all these techniques are really about. Remember that whatever comes out of your mouth will dictate how you feel. So really try hard not to gossip, not to complain, not to condemn, because it will make you feel worse. And in terms of change, make the commitment to change. Break the knot of habit, the knot of consistency. So if I said that to you, it's so easy for it to seem like an ethos, a way of thinking rather than an action. But it only becomes an ethos by being an action first. You need at this point to be thinking about spending 15 minutes a day, just breaking that knot of consistency and developing new ways of thinking that will make you feel better. And then once you've done that, then it moves on to become an ethos or a way of thinking. And I would say, really, this is the time to do it. We are rewriting history now in this minute. There is legacy in the choices that we make. So that's the end of our 3 top tips for today. Thank you so much for joining me for this webinar. Inessa, I love the little dog with the thank you message. So it always comes back to gratitude at the end. We're going to flash up a slide in a moment which has all the sort of contact information on. And I'm just going to go through this quickly in case people can't stay for the Q&A, and then I'll have a look at the chat function and see if I've been asked any questions. So on the slide now, you can see that we have www.mindfitness.training, that's the website. And as we said, if you go into Unlock You, in the resources section, there's lots of different techniques and exercises that you can use. At the very top is Tembo. That's the app that we were talking about at the beginning. So you don't download it from the App Store. You just type in usetembo.app into your browser, and then you sign in, and then from then on it works just like any other app. It is in the stage of sort of you being an early adopter. We'd absolutely love you to go on now. We don't go into the big sort of public launch for a few weeks yet, but we would love you to be one of the early adopters and to give feedback as well. And there are hundreds of exercises and techniques on it, and we're absolutely sure that there's something for everyone. But if you find that something's missing, then please let us know and we can make sure that it happens. So I'm now going to have a look at the chat and see if there are any questions that I should be answering. Thank you for the people wishing me happy birthday. That's absolutely brilliant. That's in reference to the getting older. So okay, I've got one that's really important. So I mentioned that we should use positivity even in a very difficult or a tragic situation. And I've had one question that says, how could or how should we do that? And I know that sometimes it feels counterintuitive. And as we said earlier, it even feels irreverent. But I'm going to give you an example. So possibly about 3 years ago, we did a joint fundraising project with the Breck Foundation. And the Breck Foundation came into existence after the murder of Breck Bednar, who met his attacker online. I think he was 14 at the time. And his amazing mother, Lauren, set up the Breck Foundation and has almost single-handedly managed to get the cyberbullying agenda into every school in the country. And I would say, you know, that's one of the strongest examples I can think of making sure that you look for what could I find to be the positive in this situation, because it will certainly help you deal with it. Actually, I've been coaching somebody who lost a child and who used organ donation and similarly had a very positive way of responding because of that. And it doesn't take away of course it doesn't take away the negative and the tragic. It never will and never could and never should, you know, and sitting with the sadness is an essential part of any traumatic event. You know, until we become intimate with those emotions, we don't move through them. It's really important. But yes, in terms of finding ways that we can carry on and keep a sense of purpose, looking for the positive even in those tragic or traumatic situations, is really important. Okay, I've got another one here that says, sorry, what does your ANTS stand for again? So we think of, we say that the ANTS are the automatic negative thoughts. So just to give a little bit of context on that, we have about 60,000 thoughts a day, and only 5% of those are spent on the task in hand. The rest is noise, and a lot of that is going to be automatic negative thoughts. Not all automatic thoughts are bad. If we didn't have them, it would take us half an hour to tie our shoelaces. But we have a huge amount of automatic negative thoughts, and what tends to happen is that we go from one automatic negative thought to another, to another, to another, and we go down that spiral and end up sort of at the bottom of the rabbit hole. And before you know it, 10 minutes has gone by and you're feeling really low. You know, so making sure that you have techniques that will stop you going down that rabbit hole, stop you moving from one automatic negative thought to the next, is really key in terms of dealing with stress and having a more positive mindset. It also, in fact, you know, as a sort of side thing, buys you back an awful lot of time. You know, so I have a lot of people that say, even though they're spending 15-20 minutes a day doing the mind fitness work, they're saving so much more than that because they're no longer going down the rabbit hole of the ants. Don't let the ants steal your brain. I've got okay, I've got somebody that's asked, is this available online? And is the first webinar available? So yes, after this, by the end of this week, Andy's going to edit it if it needs it, and then what we'll do is we'll send everybody who registered for this webinar a link of both this webinar and our last one. And actually also, which I forgot to mention, a link to the next one, which is on July the 1st, and that's on sleeping better. We've had a huge amount of people through this whole period of lockdown and now the next lot change saying that they're having trouble sleeping. So our next webinar, there we are, Andy flashed it up for me, brilliant, is on Wednesday, July the 1st at 4 o'clock. So please do book for that, very important. I'm going to move back to the chat now and see if I have any other. Oh yes, okay, so somebody has asked who Think and Grow Rich is by, and it's by Napoleon Hill. He's absolutely fantastic. Couldn't recommend his books more highly. Think and Grow Rich, very important. And it says, and how would you recommend evaluating your meaning, beliefs and goals? Is there a practical guide on Tembo or in the book? Yes, actually in both. So there's a whole section of it in Unlock You, and then there are lots of different exercises around the whole process of going from meaning into main goal, into specific goals, and trying to keep them linked as much as you possibly can. So, and we have another one saying, how big or little is wise to set our goals? So should we set just big goals or little goals as well? So it's important to remember that even things that are very little goals can have quite a profound effect on our lives when we achieve them. You know, if you think about, so I had someone that I worked with who was constantly late to work. You know, and it wasn't that much, sort of 10 minutes or something, and that seemed like such a little thing. But once they stopped being late to work, and actually they got there in time to have a cup of tea and a bit of a chat before they started, the stress level went down enormously. They felt much better about their ability to do the job, and started to make better relationships within their office environment. So it's remembering to link everything to your meaning and your main goals if you possibly can, but also to remember that you can have some quite big results from, you know, small goals. So big and little, I would say, definitely. And I've just got one more, which says, the tip of gratitude is so essential. In the West, we really live in many ways an extremely privileged environment, even taking lockdown into consideration. And says, thank you, Beth, happy birthday. So thank you. I absolutely agree with that. You know, and we are in a very privileged situation. As I said, sort of at the end, we're also at a point in time where we maybe can contribute to what the world looks like after this. You know, if there's anything we can do to make the wider world a kinder place, then I absolutely think, you know, that we should be doing all we can to do that. And someone else, the last one that's just come in, is looking at the eye technique. So yes, that is, it's called Big Eye, Little Eye. As an exercise, the basic exercise of the overarching statement and the ones in the middle was designed by someone called Arnold Lazarus. So you could probably Google that. And then what we've added in on Mind Fitness is just the lines out from that give the wider statements of the qualities that we have, so that it links more directly into self-image. But yes, I've just been asked if we can put that onto the email, so I will make sure that that happens, absolutely. And last one just coming in there, how to help those with conditions of pain that comes and goes. Okay, so that's a really important one. So I think that you're relating that because we talked about the importance of a positive mindset in terms of the healing process. So I'm actually going to talk about that very briefly first, Melissa, and then come back to your specific question. So the brain delivers up what it expects to a very large extent. To give an example, placebo drugs are between 40 and 72% as effective as the real thing in any drugs test, because our brain expects us to heal if we're getting something that we think is going to help us to heal. That's essentially how it works. And actually it's phenomenally higher than that in terms of sleeping pills. If you do a test between sleeping pills, the difference between this placebo and the actual sleeping pill is almost negligible. And if you think about the harmful effects of sleeping pills, which we will in the next webinar, you know, that's something really to bear in mind. So delivering up the fact that we expect to be able to cope with the pain and to be able to heal in the longer term is absolutely key. In terms of the condition of pain in that transitory sense, which I think that you're talking about, for most people, it's focusing away rather than focusing in. So, you know, we will always feel something that we're focusing in on at the time. So finding a way to focus out away from that pain is absolutely brilliant. You know, for example, there's some great research going on linking pain therapy with creative therapies, art and drama and dance even, which is, you know, some really extraordinarily hopeful work that's going on there. So I would say, you know, try and focus on something else as much as you can. It's never going to be, you know, to be able to take the pain completely away, but it can definitely, you know, go some of the way to doing that. And I've got one that says, can I explain the rational thinking briefly, recap it, or is there somewhere where you can read about it? Yep. So I think what I'll do is I'll direct you to either the book. There's a whole section on the ABC, but actually you will get a link to the last webinar, Managing Anxiety, Coping in a Crisis, and that went into more detail of the negative side of the rational thinking that we looked at today, in terms of the positive. So I would say have a look at the webinar. And if you're still needing more stuff, there's also an awful lot on Use Tembo on the app. So go into Tembo, the app, and there are reframing. There's a whole section. If you go into the exercise hub, there are lots and lots of different reframing exercises, and it will go through the whole sort of technique of doing that, negative to positive, demands to preferences. But if you can't find it after that, email me and I can send you a message privately. That's absolutely fine. So I think I've answered all the questions that have come in. Please do feel free to email me. Please do jump onto Tembo, the app. We really hope that it helps everybody. And please do come to the next webinar on sleeping better on July the 1st. Thank you so much. Goodbye.